Before you read another line, do one urgent thing. Subscribe to this channel right now. This isn't a suggestion, it's protection. What you're about to see is the pattern they hide, the mechanism they never explain. And if you want to keep seeing this content, you must stay connected. The darkest secret about control is not that someone watches you, it's that the system trains you to love the watching. It's not only surveillance, it's seduction, a long game that makes submission feel like belonging. The machinery of control dresses itself in warmth so resistance looks like loneliness. Control works when you consent without noticing. Small accommodations, polite compromises, and everyday conveniences accumulate into a structure that no one ever voted for, but everyone ends up maintaining. That is how the invisible fortress is built, not with force, but with favors. They hide the mechanism by hiding its language. Instead of admitting design, they call it culture, market forces, or human nature. Words are the cloak of control. When disagreement lacks vocabulary, it dies before it can speak. Language shapes what can be challenged and what cannot. Ask yourself, when did you last question a natural rule that everyone else accepted without thinking? That single question cracks complacency and forces a choice between comfort and clarity. The real control is multi-layered. There are laws and there are rituals. There are cameras and there are jokes that teach obedience. Each layer supports the others, so removing one leaves the rest intact. The architecture is designed to self-heal whenever challenged. Power manufactures normality. It normalizes constant monitoring by making benefits visible and costs invisible. Rewards now, consequences later, with 1,000 tiny gratifications that sweeten the trap. People trade privacy for convenience and never realize they've sold a piece of their independence. Institutions become the arms of the system because they shape expectation. Schools, corporations, and media do not merely reflect behavior. They model it, repeat it, and ritualize it until the patterns feel inevitable. This is how control becomes habitual. The secret also rests in distribution. Control is not total, it's selective. Some are allowed more freedom to perform dissent because it helps the script. The illusion of permitted rebellion is a pressure release valve that keeps the structure intact while appearing tolerant. Have you noticed how some outrage is amplified while other dissent is erased? Who decides which voice is allowed to rage and which is labeled toxic? That curation is not neutral. Control buys complicity through incentives. Pathways to comfort, jobs, status, cultural acceptance are handed to those who play along. Ambition becomes a subtle bribe. Climb, and you join the mechanism that locked everyone else in place. Those who accept the prize then defend the system that gave it to them. Data is the fuel, and narratives are the fire. With enough behavioral data, architects of control can predict likely reactions and design incentives that keep populations within acceptable parameters. Consent becomes a pattern to be optimized rather than a moral choice to be earned. Surveillance scales not to punish, but to nudge. Punishment is messy. Influence is elegant. If you can make the right choice irresistibly easy, people choose it and then defend it as if it were their idea. That is influence disguised as freedom. The darkest secret is that control often prefers to co-opt lovers, not enemies. A person convinced to love their chains will guard them more fiercely than any soldier. This is the psychology of allegiance, the internal guard. Ask, who benefits when you proudly declare you chose their system? And how does that pride make questioning harder? Pride cements consent into identity. Control is taught in childhood through tiny rituals. Cueing, applause, end-of-class silence. These aren't trivial, they are training sessions. The small actions become the scaffolding of a lifetime of predictable behavior. By adulthood, the program runs with minimal input. Legitimacy is manufactured through spectacle. Ceremonies, awards, and media pageantry create moral cover for structures that would otherwise look ugly. Theatrical approval is converted into quiet obedience. People follow because they believe the system is admired. Economic levers monetize obedience. Debt, subscription models, and gated access tie survival to compliance. When basic needs depend on participating in the system, refusal becomes an act of self-destruction rather than liberation. That is the financial hinge of control. Censorship is no longer only about erasing speech, it's about drowning it in noise. Flood the channels with competing stimuli and the critical message never lands. If you can't sustain attention, you can't sustain resistance. Noise is the modern eraser. Ask yourself, when you try to share a truth, how often is it met with distraction, dismissal, or outrage theater that makes the message disappear? That reaction is not accidental. It's engineered. Power refashions trust into a commodity. Trust the brand. Trust the experts. Trust the platform. And you outsource your skepticism. Trust without tools to verify becomes a liability. You become a vector of compliance, not a citizen. The system crafts scapegoats to redirect anger. When the public feels betrayed, directing fury at an easy target keeps focus away from structural architects. Blame is a funnel that preserves the machine by channeling energy harmlessly. Cultural rituals convert resistance into folklore. A story of past rebellion neutralized into a marketable nostalgia. Purchase the protest tee. Follow the hashtag, then return to daily routine. Consumption collapses insurgency into commerce. Even law is a theater sometimes. Legal frameworks can appear to limit power while actually entrenching it. Regulations that centralize control under the pretext of protecting the public. Forms of protection often double as envelopes of authority. Institutions model the contour of acceptable anger. They allow a little, so long as it never points at the foundation. This is the quiet choreography, permitted protest that never destabilizes the choreography of power. Ask, how often have reforms pacified a movement while leaving its root causes untouched? And how quickly did people declare victory? That pattern repeats because it works. The deepest secrecy is ethical capture, when the system convinces you that compliance is morale. You aren't just told to obey. You are taught to believe obedience is the right thing. Moralization is the final gasket sealing influence into identity. Education systems teach technique, not critique. Students learn to pass tests, not to question the assumptions behind the questions. A population trained to solve problems within a box will rarely imagine the box itself as the problem. Networks normalize behavior. When friends, workplaces, and online circles perform approval rituals, dissent feels like social suicide. Social architecture polices thought in ways laws never could. Ostracism outperforms statute. Commercial platforms harvest your attention and sell it back in the form of predictions about your choices. If your choices can be predicted, nudged, and monetized, independence is an expensive illusion you think you own. Ask yourself, how many of your habits are truly yours, and how many are optimized by someone whose profit depends on your predictability? Recognizing that difference matters. Resistance is anticipated and incorporated. Activists are profiled, then offered roles inside the system that pacify them. A seat at the table often becomes a way to redirect criticism into institutional maintenance. Co-optation is the long con of control. The most dangerous silence is self-silencing. People learn to edit themselves preemptively, anticipating rejection or reprisal. That inner censor becomes more durable than any external ban, because you police yourself even when no one watches. Technology accelerates self-silencing. The knowledge that everything leaves a trace changes behavior. The awareness of surveillance is enough to make many withdraw from truth-telling. Silence becomes a survival skill. Ask, when did you last hold back a truth because you feared the consequences, even if those consequences were only social discomfort? That hesitation is the gatekeeper of control. Complexity is wielded to induce surrender. Present systems as too complicated for ordinary citizens to grasp, and they will defer to experts. Deference masquerades as trust, but it is often a thin shield for disengagement. The more complex the justification, the less public scrutiny it endures. Narrative capture rewrites dissent as pathology. Critics are labeled irrational, extremist, or unwell. Pathologizing opposition delegitimizes it and discourages others from listening. Medicalization of dissent is a modern silencer. Power uses time as an eraser. Delay investigations, postpone reforms, prolong litigation. Time wears down will, disperses attention, and buries momentum. The best way to bury a scandal is to wait until everyone forgets. The system trains gratitude for crumbs. Small reforms are presented as miracles, making people forget the structural deprivation that remains. Gratitude for scraps functions as adhesive for consent. Ask, what small concessions have you celebrated that actually preserved a larger injustice? Noticing that helps you stop celebrating crumbs. Finally, the darkest element. Control disguises itself as identity. If your sense of self becomes intertwined with the system, the job, the brand, the lifestyle, then defending the system becomes defending yourself. That alignment turns critique into betrayal and keeps you fighting to maintain the chains. Before this block closes, remember, knowledge is the first rupture. Seeing the pattern dissolves its mystique. Once the mechanism is visible, it is harder to love the trap. If you want more revelations like these, subscribe now and stay awake. If you are here now, it means you want to see what was never meant to be shown. But listen carefully. Before we reveal the deepest layers, make sure you subscribe immediately. This channel is one of the few places that dares to speak about what others bury. Don't leave yourself exposed to ignorance. Lock in your access now. The second half of this truth begins with memory. Control rewrites the past, adjusting it until the present feels inevitable. When history is molded into propaganda, people accept today as destiny, not design. The power to rewrite yesterday is the real power to dictate tomorrow. Have you ever wondered why certain parts of history are repeated endlessly while others are quietly forgotten? That selective memory is no accident. It is the filter that keeps the system's story alive while burying the cracks. Control thrives on invisibility. The less you notice its fingerprints, the more effective it becomes. The most perfect chains are the ones you forget you're wearing. When the weight vanishes from perception, obedience feels like freedom. In this architecture, distraction is a weapon. Infinite entertainment, endless scrolling, trivial controversies. All of them function as a smoke curtain. If your attention is consumed, you cannot look behind the curtain. If you cannot look, you cannot resist. Ask, how many hours of your day are stolen by screens, leaving you too drained to question the structure that controls you? That exhaustion is not incidental. It is engineered. Another layer is emotional conditioning. Fear is the sharp edge, but comfort is the glue. Systems mix both to train populations, terrify them into compliance, then soothe them with rewards for obedience. This cycle repeats until the reflex becomes automatic. Silence is manufactured not only by censorship, but by ridicule. If exposing truth makes you laughable, few will dare to try. Laughter weaponized against truth is one of the most underestimated instruments of control. They teach you that rebellion is pointless. Through endless examples of crushed movements and failed revolutions, the lesson is written into the collective psyche. Resistance is futile. That hopelessness is the anesthetic that keeps the machine running. Ask yourself, who benefits when entire generations believe that nothing they do will ever matter? That despair is not natural. It is designed. Control also thrives in architecture itself. The layout of cities, the design of offices, the organization of schools. These physical structures shape behavior more than speeches or laws. Space is scripted to direct movement and limit options. Technology is another net. Every convenience app, every automated service, every connected device collects fragments of you. Those fragments combine into a portrait more accurate than your own reflection. With that portrait, your next move is not only known, it is influenced. The darkest secret is that prediction replaces freedom. If your future actions can be calculated with high accuracy, what room is left for independence? You may still feel free, but your choices were already anticipated and accounted for. Have you noticed how recommendations seem to know you better than you know yourself? Do you see how often you surrender your will to algorithms without a fight? This is why control doesn't look like chains. It looks like mirrors reflecting back desires that were seated in you. You pursue them believing they are yours, when in truth, they were carefully planted. That is the illusion of autonomy. Culture itself becomes a cage. When music, fashion, and even slang are standardized globally, dissent looks archaic. People abandon uniqueness for fear of irrelevance. Homogenization is celebrated as progress, while individuality is dismissed as rebellion. Ask, when did you last make a choice that was truly yours, not one sold to you as the latest trend? That single reflection can expose the leash disguised as preference. Control also hijacks morality. By shaping what is considered virtuous, the system convinces you that obedience is not only smart, but good. To resist becomes shameful. To question becomes immoral. The trap is sealed when ethics are rewritten. The media is not a window, it is a stage. Stories are scripted, villains are chosen, heroes are manufactured. Every crisis you consume is curated to reinforce the same central lesson. Trust the system. Distrust yourself. Education enforces repetition. Students memorize frameworks that limit imagination, preparing them for careers inside the system, never outside. Creativity that challenges structure is filtered out early. The rest is rewarded for compliance disguised as achievement. Ask yourself, why do so many brilliant minds end up defending the very system that limits them? That is the real exam, and almost no one passes it. Even your relationships are not untouched. Social dynamics are influenced by platforms that reward conformity and punish deviation. Friendships fracture when algorithms elevate conflict, while obedience wins applause. The system inserts itself into the most intimate bonds. Control ensures that rebellion is commodified. A product, a slogan, a lifestyle brand, rebellion becomes something you can buy instead of something you can live. Once purchased, its danger is neutralized. The system does not need to silence everyone. It only needs to silence enough to create the illusion of consensus. Once the majority appears compliant, the rest fold under peer pressure. Numbers themselves are a weapon. Ask, how often have you changed your mind, not because you were convinced, but because you felt outnumbered? That is how perception becomes submission. The final, darkest truth is this: control is not something external. It is internalized. You carry it in your routines, your fears, your desires. The chains are inside you now, and that is why they are so hard to break. But here is the twist they never reveal. Seeing the pattern weakens it. The very act of noticing the invisible cage cracks its walls. Awareness is the enemy of manipulation. That is why they fight so hard to distract you. So now the question is yours. Will you continue to play their game, or will you step outside the script? The choice terrifies them more than anything. And before we close, if you want to keep piercing the illusions and uncovering what was never meant to reach you, you must take action. Subscribe to this channel right now, not tomorrow, not later. Do it now, because the truths ahead will not wait, and missing them means staying inside the cage.